Hello, I'm Maria Cristina Villaseñor. I'm the programming director of the New York International Children's Film Festival, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to NYICFF's Children's Media Industry Forum 2022 panel, Toward an Inclusive Future. Today's panel is focused on fostering a diverse workforce, and we're thrilled to host this conversation with BIPOC filmmakers and creative experts whose successes we celebrate and whose insights will glean. You'll hear inspired stories and leave with a roadmap for how to skillfully navigate the field no matter what side of the camera you're on. Today's Industry Forum event is generously supported by the New York City Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, Humanities New York, Unifrance, Netflix, and Silvergate. Thanks to them all, and thanks also to our members. We couldn't do this without you, to our board, our staff, our interns. It takes a village to do what we do, and we appreciate all of you, and we're thrilled to expand this conversation outwardly, and thanks to everyone for joining us. We definitely want to welcome your questions. So in today's panel, we'll start off with a broad conversation, but we will definitely leave room for you all. So please feel free to say hello in the chat. We'll also have a Q&A function going where you can drop in your questions and we'll make sure to field them to you all. So we're thrilled to welcome our amazing lineup of NYICFF filmmakers and speakers, and we're especially excited today to welcome guest moderator Laura Ordoñez from Common Sense Media. Laura is head of podcast ratings and reviews for Common Sense Media, where she spearheaded the launch of the first of its kind comprehensive podcast ratings and review channel. Her work is centralized on highlighting diversity, equity, and inclusion with the goal of serving underrepresented and underserved audiences of all ages. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much, Maria Cristina. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thanks for having me. I am really excited to be honored to be joined by an amazing group of panelists. They are all very talented, multifaceted, and innovative creators in their spaces. So I'd like to start out by just introducing who we have on the panel today. I'll start with Priya, Giri, Desai. Priya is the executive producer for BWA Studios, a Black female-owned animation house focused on building equity in the animation industry. She's also the co-founder of the India Center Foundation and board member of the New York International Children's Film Festival and talent recruiter. Working in children's media since 2003, when she worked on Emmy-nominated series Postcards from Buster, which was the adaptation from the well-known Arthur, which explored kids of all different backgrounds from around the world. She went on to direct and produce Lovesick, a feature-length documentary film set in India that had its world premiere at the DOC NYC, which is one of the largest documentary festivals in 2017. She also helped develop WGBH's Kids Podcast strategy and produced their first podcast, Molly of Denali, which received the 2021 Kids Screen Award for Best Inclusivity in Kids Programming. Welcome, Priya. Our next panelist is Camrus Johnson. Camrus is a filmmaker, a New York International Children's Film Festival Grand Prize Audience Award winner for short film She Dreams at Sunrise. Camrus released 3 films in 2019. The Sun is Also a Star, The Cat and the Moon, and After Class. And Camrus also plays Luke Fox in DC's Batwoman on the CW. If that's not enough, Camrus is also a musician with a second single being released this month, and a writer currently developing a comic book series. So really, Camrus has perspective of all different angles of media. So welcome, Camrus. And last but definitely not least, we have Huda Razzak. Huda is a filmmaker. She is a NYICFF Jury Prize winner for animated short film, The Ocean Duck. In 2021, she graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design with a Master of Fine Arts in degree in animation. Huda focuses primarily in writing, storyboarding, and production. She's also a 2-time Screencraft finalist, former ISF film grant recipient, and selected participant in directing mentorship with women in animation. She currently works as a story editorial production assistant at Netflix Animation. Welcome, Huda. And just reintroducing myself, I'm Laura Ordoñez. I am head of podcast ratings and reviews at Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media is a nonprofit organization where on our editorial side, we do ratings and reviews for all different forms of media, TV, film, books, now podcasts, movies, and games. So we give families, caregivers, and educators all of the information they need about different content forms so that they can make educated decisions on the media that they bring into their child's lives. So, and as a just kind of preface to what we're talking about today, we recently launched our diversity initiative in the editorial space by launching our DEI, diverse representations content grid, which really looks into the diversity that's happening into all media forms. So that's TV, movies, podcasts, games, and books, and really diving deep into how inclusivity is being included or not in media forms. So I just want to talk about why we have come here today. Today, we're here to talk about the importance of inclusion in children's media and actionably, intentionally, and authentically fostering a more diverse workforce with roadmaps to get folks there as part of the creative production process and field. And I say actively and intentionally and authentically because I really want to highlight those three elements. At one point in time, I think it was really easy to kind of throw a token character in somewhere, add a Black or a Latina writer, just check off these little checkpoints, right, to make sure we were diverse enough in media. But today, we're in 2022, and we need to do more, and we're trying to do more. And I think that needs to come definitely authentically and intentionally. What can be really difficult for, I think, creators is, what does that mean, right? So instead of admonishing and saying, this isn't diverse enough, we don't have enough diversity, we have to give creators the tools they need to actually be able to look at, what does that mean? How do I make my stories more diverse? How do I create media that's more diverse? So I know from our podcast industry, that seems a lot easier because we're so young, and as we're launching our podcast ratings and reviews, it's so great because there's this new kind of level playing ground that we can start to create diverse media for kids. But when you're looking at TV and film, these are industries that have been built on this foundation for so long. And so now there's going back and looking at, what are the wrongs that we're righting? How are we changing? What are the tools we need to make sure we learn from what was done in the past at a different time to really kind of reinvent that now? And it really has to start from the inside out. And that's what we're talking about today, especially when you have the most difficult critics you can have, which is kids. They do not take the fake it till you make it type perspective when it comes to the media they're consuming. They can tell if it's genuine. They can tell if it's representing them. And we've all seen the research that's out there on the importance of kids having media that reflects who they are, right? And that's all different kids. I would say that probably all of us on this panel have had a moment in our childhood where we struggled to find someone who looked like us in media. I know as an Afro-Latina woman who was raised in a Jewish household, I never found a character that was just like me. I was always picking at that. Maybe they were a little bit darker, or maybe they, had a diverse household a little bit. And maybe I kind of picked at those little things and took those, but I never saw a character that reflected me really as a full human being. And I think that's really what we owe our kids out there. That's what we owe this next generation. So today we are going to not just put that out there and give you that burden. We are going to really talk about what steps we can take and what all of these creators have really done in the industry to create a more diverse space and give you kind of different ideas of what you can do as creators. So with that being said, I would like to start us off with Priya, Giri, Desai. Welcome, Priya.
Thank you.
Well, Priya, you really pioneered everything we're kind of talking about in your space, right? Just going over the list of everything you've done. Can you just tell us about your own introduction into the animation space in children's media?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, NYICFF and Maria Christina and the whole team. You talked about one of the earliest animation projects I worked on. It was Postcards from Buster, which was a spin-off of Arthur, which I think many of us have been raised on or raise our children on. And what that was, interestingly, was a response to 9/11 that PBS Kids had. 9/11 happened, and PBS Kids did a call out to all of their producers, their animation producers, saying, what can we do to respond to this that's appropriate for kids? And one response was to create this spin-off of Arthur, which was hybrid animation and documentary storytelling. And it was where this character Buster, who focus grouped very, very well, and everybody other than Arthur, he was, easily the most popular character. He had an innate curiosity already. He had a father who happened to be an airline pilot. All these things already existed to help him move across first the country and then the world. And so a show was pitched in which he traveled all over the country with his dad. And everywhere that he stopped, he met a new kid. And that kid shared their life with him. And so our mandate, our remit as producers of that show was to find those stories of real kids and then to construct narratives around a Buster narrative around that kid's story. So I found stories of a little girl in Houston she's probably 25 now, but her family had a legacy of riding horses in the Black Rodeo in Houston. But it was a great way to show Houston. I did a story about we did a story about the Hasidic Jewish community in New York City. We did a story about the Cuban community in Miami. I did a story, we were trying to figure out a story about Chicago. And because of my own, lived experience and knowledge of family, I knew that Devon Avenue was really interesting in Chicago. It's the Desai community. It's where brown folks live and eat and hang and worship. And I ended up finding a Muslim parochial school and a little 9-year-old girl who played basketball. And so that was like our window into Chicago. We got heat for that stuff. We got a lot of flack for that stuff. The show actually ended rather famously because of a choice we made. But that was my introduction into the idea of inclusive storytelling for kids. And I had never worked in kids before. I had never worked in animation before. I had worked as a writer and a storyteller. I had worked in magazines before this, like doing feature writing and being an editor. So I was a freelance writer, so I could certainly hustle and find myself a story. And I think that's why I got hired. And the rest of it, I just kind of learned, like animation script, like the actual production process of animation. But that's where it all started for me. And I, as your description so aptly put, I went off and did other things. I made a documentary film in India because that's where my family's from. And it was a story I really cared about. I always kept my hand in the world of children's animation. And a few years ago came back into it as a development producer. And what that meant was, I was going out and finding new talent, finding new ways of telling stories for kids. And that's where we came up with the idea of the Molly of Denali podcast, which was one of the first that PBS made. And, that series was really interesting and innovative because it was about the Alaska Native community. I helped put together a writing fellowship for that project that put 6 Alaska Native writers in the writer's room. We found them, we trained them, we paid them to write scripts. And now, they're almost all of them are in the season 2 writer's room. And I was particularly proud because that show won a Peabody Award. And in the call out for the award, they called out that we had done that writing fellowship. And I think that that's the kind of thing, as I evolve and grow as a producer, and now I work much more in a freelance and independent way. That's what I just try and bring now. I have a certain perch, and I think it's my responsibility and my privilege to be able to bring folks with me as I do this work, whatever level they're at. And I think that that's in the ethos of Black Women Animate, of BWA Studios, which is that we're going to always lift somebody up with us so if I set up a project with animators and illustrators, there's going to be somebody there who is newer, who is more emerging, and they're going to have the benefit of experiencing that process with somebody who's more experienced. So that's the kind of way that I'm, contributing to what's going on right now.
Thank you, Priya. And you said something that really kind of stuck with me, which was, when you were doing postcards for Buster, that kind of backlash you got. So can you just give everyone kind of watching today a perspective of what maybe you were up against at that point to
Sure.
what you're seeing now? I'd love to know what the evolution of diversity in kids media that you saw at that point in those challenges look like, and what that looks like now, because I think sometimes it can be disheartening, right?
Yeah. And I'm going to preface it all by saying I don't think it's gone at all. If anything, I just think it's a little more insidious. But what happened in Postcards from Buster, and anybody can Google this and find it, is that we made an episode in Vermont. We actually made our episodes based on locations. That's how we decided things. And this show started in season 1 as something in North America, and it eventually expanded to be global, but we started in America. So episode, 30 something was Vermont. And ostensibly the show was about maple sugaring and, kind of the great outdoors of Vermont. There was a sibling pair in the episode who had 2 moms. And this was close to, 15 years ago at this point, 2000, maybe 4. Or maybe more like 10 years. Yeah. And more than 15. They had 2 moms. We sent the fine cut to PBS Kids for approval as usual. And at the time, the show was funded in part by the Department of Education. There's a media fund that the Department of Education gives PBS shows. You can apply for it. And that was at the time, a new Department of Education secretary had just been appointed by George W. Bush. And her office saw the episode and decided it was inappropriate for children. The scene in question were 2 children who point to a photograph on a table in their home and they go, "Those are my moms." And that was enough for the Department of Ed to take to basically say they were going to pull all the money from the show. And so it was super bad timing, because we were about at the end of season 1, we were about to get season 2 funding. So everybody who had said they were going to give us money for season 2 funding pulled out. So we all lost our jobs and the show was over. And season 2 and 3 subsequently came back, but they came back much, much smaller. And to WGBH Boston's credit, the PBS station that produces the show, they found the funding themselves. And put the show out. But that's what happened way back then in 2004. So we were all done. I got laid off. The whole thing happened and it was over. And, it was like on CNN for a week, and Frank Rich wrote about it when he was still at the New York Times, and then it was over. And I went on and did many other things. But I can say today, a couple things are different. There's a few more of us who are in positions to be able to sell shows and buy shows. Not too many, but a few of us. And, but I find that, I'm in a different position now, but what I find is that I still have to fight for my right to be in a space or to be in a room. And I'm unafraid to do that. I'm happy to do it. I just find that it's surprising to me that I've been around as long as I have, doing all the things that I have. And I still have to kind of, prove my mettle to be in a space. I mean, that happened to me as recently as last week. So I think the only upside right now is I'm old enough and experienced enough to just speak up. And I think there's more allies around now to speak up with you. And I think that's kind of the real ticket, is that I think the scarcity model of keeping us all apart from each other and separated was the tactic that worked for a really long time. And now it's been figured out. So I just will not work in that model. I just won't do it. So I work with allies. We help each other out. We call out stuff that doesn't serve all of us. And that makes me a little bit more hopeful.
And I think it's really telling that one of the things I took from your journey was that you didn't give up when the first, when you got laid off, when there was that obstacle, when it's probably the most disheartening. I think we've all kind of been in that space where it's just like, how do I do better if I'm not allowed to do better? But you kept going. And I think that's something that can be really hard to do. It's very difficult to do, but you do it. And I mean,
it reaps rewards. And what I will say, and I'm sure Camrus and Huda are going to tell you the same thing because they're actual creators on journeys, but I detoured. I certainly detoured. I just found a way actually to lean into my voice more. And what I think has happened over the years, and I'm sure these guys will say something similar, is leaning in more to your actual voice, your true voice, I think is the thing that gives you strength ultimately. I mean, I was on an informational call with an animator 2 hours ago, and she's talking to me about wanting to come up with a new TV show idea for kids, which I think is great. And my only advice to her was, create the thing that only you can create. So when you're in the pitch room pitching, that you have so thoroughly answered the question of why do you have to be the one to make this? And why does it have to be you? And why can it only be you? Answer that question, like start from there always. So yes, I took some detours and did other things, but what I think I ended up doing was finding my voice.
Great. Thank you so much, Priya. I'm so excited to turn our attention over to Camrus Johnson, but first I'd like to have a brief look at his most recent award-winning film at NYICFF, She Dreams at Sunrise. Welcome, Cameron. That was a beautiful introduction of your work. I know that you are a multiple award winner and a multi-hyphenate in the field, but I just want to kind of get what was your inspiration really to kind of start off in this field and really start crafting a very personalized form of animation that really spoke to you, but you thought spoke to others as well?
My journey in animation, not just in animation, but just directing and writing in general, is interesting because it came by accident. I made this film because I met with this incredible animator, Pedro Piccinini. I was working at a restaurant and he was my regular. So on my last day at the job, I figured out that he was an animator. And I was like, oh, we should make something together. I am a writer, you're an animator, let's do something. So we started working on this short. And then as we were working on it, my dad's best friend passed away. So I asked if we could put that first film on pause and make something for my dad, just some sort of surprise gift. That's called Grab My Hand, Letter to My Dad. So we made this film together, and I watched it with him while I was shooting my show. And we cried and we hugged and we did the whole thing. And I was like, great. The whole point of this film was to make you cry. And I did that. So let's go make that other short now. And my animator was like, oh, I'm too busy. I can't do that first one anymore. So I was like, well, great. Well, now what am I supposed to do? I have this like thing that I made for my dad, but like this isn't like a short film. Like it's just like a project. So I showed a couple of friends like, hey, look at this thing I made. And my 5 friends cried. And I was like, oh, weird. I guess I'll try to put in festivals and see if I can get my animator some love. And it turned into this thing. It went to somewhere close to 70 festivals. It won like 25 awards. It was twice qualified for the Oscars, one of them being at this incredible festival. And at one of these festivals, I can't remember which one it was. It might have actually been New York International Children's, but I got asked by someone, a moderator or a host or someone, so how does it feel to be the next Black voice in animation? And I was like, what? Is that what I am? I was like, okay, it feels great, you know? It feels like the dream. And although I love animation, I never planned to work as a creator in it, always as a voiceover actor, because that's what I do. As a young Black kid from Georgia, the middle of nowhere, Georgia, creating animation was never something that was even on my radar, because how do you even do that? What does that even mean? And how could someone my age with my skin tone do that? So when I was doing it, I didn't even realize that I was doing it. I was just sort of already there. So as time went on, She Dreams at Sunrise came because Tribeca reached out and wanted to program Grab My Hand, but they couldn't because of it already premiered in New York at New York International Children's Film Festival. So they were like, okay, would you be down to make your next short with us? I was like, yeah, of course. So I made She Dreams at Sunrise with Tribeca Studios producing. And it's sort of, these shorts have created my animation career. So the first short that we were going to make that we put on hold is now in development as a series. And the bio that you said before, I guess I sent you an older bio, but I now have an animated feature in development that we pitched recently, and a couple other features in development. So my entire directing and writing career started through animation, but completely by accident. but what I've learned through the process is that all the stories that come from my heart, like Priya said, the things that come from my experiences, the things that only I can tell are the things that people want to hear. Because when you're telling a story like that, it doesn't really matter when you mess up. It doesn't really matter what your mistakes are, because every film that you create is going to have some sort of fires and mistakes. Huda, I'm sure you completely agree. Something's always going to go wrong, but somehow when it comes from your heart, it fills those spots, because it doesn't matter. It's so raw and so you that all those little holes are quickly filled with your love for the story. So anyway, yeah, that's my long answer for how I sort of got into this.
I think they would call your journey a happy mistake.
Right?
Yeah, but you know what I love that stuck out that you were talking about was when someone had asked you, like, how does it feel to be this next great Black animator, right? The voice of animation. And I think sometimes it can feel, especially as people of color, like the one, right? The one. And there's a lot of responsibility put on that. So my question would be, where do you see the opportunity to grow like groups of cohorts who are telling these stories in different, authentic, diverse ways that can work together, even though they're telling these separate stories from their experiences, but can support and work together to make this the norm?
Well, I think it's like what Ava DuVernay said once. It's just, if you're looking for diverse voices, you just have to look. Like, it's not that we're hidden under the ground somewhere. Like, we're all here, like there are Black animators and animation directors and animation writers animation writers that are looking for these jobs. The only reason that mine took off is because I was already an actor. So I already had a platform. People already knew me for one thing. And then when they realized like, oh, I can also work behind the camera, that's why it took off. But I wasn't hiding, like I was always sort of a storyteller. So I feel like there are creators of color out there looking for their opportunity. And I think when it comes to us as creators looking for our future crews, it is also our jobs to look for people that look like us around us, because that's also kind of hard. One thing I've talked to my friends recently is that we've been in this game for so long, I assume that you've been in this game so long, that we're surrounded by white creatives. So sometimes it's easy to say, well, I worked with that guy on 5 projects, I worked with that girl on 10 projects, why don't I just do that again? And it is our job to start looking a little bit more, because we need to also prove that it's possible, that if you look and you find someone, they are around, they are there. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's so many ways to reach out. And one thing I've learned in animation specifically is that there are so many young, hungry animators that are either about to graduate college or fresh out of college, and they're so down to make something interesting. Because once you go from your passion in college to working for one of the big animation studios, those are 2 completely different styles of animation, right? So I know some animators that can't even get out of their animation mind because they're so used to like, oh, how do you make a short for less than $1 million? Like, because I've been at Sony or Pixar for so long, I don't remember how to do that. But then there's other animators that are like, wait, how do you make a short film for $1 million? You know, like they're 2 different vibes. So it depends on what you're looking for. There are animators out there of color in every country of the world making what you are looking for. Like it may even be hard to find, but they exist and they are hungry, and oftentimes they're affordable. So I feel like a lot of it is just looking. I'll even give a crazy example. My friend, one of my best friends, she's working with an animator in the Ukraine right now. And of all places, she's working with an animator in the Ukraine, if you heard what I just said. So this person has a lot going on, obviously, but she's still making it work because she wants to have her work seen. She's like, oh, you're in the States, I animate, I want to work with you. I'm hungry and I'm young. They're out there. I just need you to start making phone calls and start sending messages, because you'll find somebody dope.
I think that's such a great point to bring up, Camrus. Thank you. I think it's very easy to get stuck in our comfort zone. And that's, as I was saying earlier, with TV, with movies, this is the way it's always been done. So it can be very easy to stay in that zone. But I think knowing that the first place that you can make that change is stepping outside of the comfort zone, which I know is so cliche, but things are cliche for a reason, right?
Yeah.
That is what you do. And that is the intentionality behind it, is really saying, we know that these creators are out there. It's our job to find them.
And I want to throw one more thing out, if you don't mind. One other thing that I wanted to mention is, since people of color are so new to getting these opportunities, don't be afraid to reach out to your dream, your number one, because at the end of the day, your number one still isn't as busy as the number one white person of that field, because we're just not there yet. We just don't have the same opportunities. So if you're trying to reach out to the Viola Davis of animators or whatever it is, there is a chance that she's like, oh yes, I am so down to do this, because even though I am where I am, like Viola Davis, even though she is the queen, sometimes she still doesn't get all of the opportunities that she deserves. You know what I'm saying? So don't be afraid to reach out. And one example is, when I directed an episode of my show Batwoman, there was one character in the script that was very clearly like a 30s white woman. And I was like, what if we went with like a seasoned Latinx woman? So I reached out to Judy Reyes from Scrubs, who I am a big fan of. And I actually sent her a letter and was like, I love you. Like, please come do these episodes for me. And she was like, yeah, cool, I'll be there. And I was like, for real? Like, like she came and she blew us all away. She needed no rehearsal. She needed no extra takes. She came and she did it. And I sat down and I talked to her on set, and she was like, you'd be surprised. Like, I don't get that many opportunities because people see me as one thing, but I haven't had a chance to spread my wings a little bit. Judy hopped on that joint so quickly and crushed it. And now I cannot wait to find her next job, which could be yours if you just reach out.
That's a great actionable step and great advice. Thank you so much, Camrus. I am so excited to turn it over to Huda Razzak. But I do want to first start with a quick look at Huda's New York International Children's Film Festival award-winning film, The Ocean Duck.
It's time to make a cake, it's time to make a cake. Bibi salam.
Oh, salam, Huda, Habibti.
Are you reading your poems again?
Yes, I am. I'm actually reading my favorite poem.
About what?
the ocean duck.
An ocean duck?
Yes, but this duck was different. This duck was raised by chickens in a hen house
What? Why?
because the duck forgot her home was the ocean.
That's a really weird duck, Phoebe.
Oh, not so, sweetheart. After all, we're all ducks living like chickens.
I'm excited to watch more of that. Hi, Huda. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to start out with just how did your upbringing and maybe your family or the people you were surrounded with help you to and inspire you to take the path you took in creating?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll start off with saying that just a little bit about my background. My parents immigrated from Iraq, from Baghdad, and they came here when they're teenage years. And my mom's family actually had like a little bit more turmoil in coming here. So they were refugees for a little bit overseas. And because my uncle was in medicine here, he was able to sponsor them to come here. So they had kind of a little bit more of a traumatic way of getting here. And so I was born here, raised here, and grew up with that kind of history of my family and you know how they came. And so I would say that like a big part of just what is inspiring my stories and what inspires what I want to do is kind of telling my own and telling my family's stories. And so this one in particular, the ocean duck, is actually inspired by my grandmother and my relationship with her. And she passed away a few years ago after struggling for a few years with dementia. And so during my thesis in school, I wanted, it was happening around the same time, and I couldn't like help but just do something just for her. And so what's interesting about my relationship with my grandmother is the only one in our like extended family that could not speak English at all. And so after she passed away, it was almost like losing like a part of me that like, as a kid, I was forced to use my language, to use that mother tongue. And once she passed away, I didn't have that anymore. And so I almost felt like I lost a little part of myself and my background, my cultural background. And so there was a little bit of soul searching during the same time where I wanted to sort of reconnect to those roots and tell that story as inspired by that culture as possible as well. So that's a little bit of a roundabout way of saying just kind of how my connection with my family and my background sort of inspired me to tell those personal stories. They're the only ones, it's like the only way I could, you know, contribute to that is by kind of drawing upon my own personal family and stories. And yeah.
I love that you say that, because that brings up something really important. I think there's so many kids out there who not only want to see themselves reflected, but maybe grew up in the US and have heard stories, but how do you continue? I mean, storytelling, that has always been how you keep your history, your familial history going, right? And this is, any sort of media format is no different. So I just kind of wonder, is there someone who inspired you on one hand to kind of continue to tell these stories and continue to keep that going on? And how have you been placed in a position to kind of be a role model for that to other creators?
Oh yeah, for this one's an easy answer. I have a daughter and she's 8 years old. And so I can't help but see her as sort of like a younger version of myself. And she shapes a lot of the goals and things that I would like to do for her, and also kind of like for that younger version of myself that grew up with not having as much access to stories and characters that reflected myself, or even just more diverse backgrounds in general. And And I noticed that it had an impact on my own confidence and sense of belonging. And as things have changed a lot, it's a very different time now where my daughter has much more access and sees a lot more different representation than I did. And I already see like a huge positive difference in her. She's an incredibly confident, awesome kid. And I want it to stay that way. I want it to stay that way when she grows up and goes to middle school and goes through all those awkward, horrible years of just kind of like all that kind of pressure and that feeling of wanting to fit in. And I want to do whatever I can to support that and to create an impact that inspires self-love and acceptance and inclusion and a universal connection that hopefully, you know, I'd be able to further. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to move on to, I want to ask you all like 10 million more questions, but the audience also has some questions. So I definitely want to put those out there. Let's see. This one is for Camrus. We'll start with this one. Camrus, as an African-American creator myself, the question is, when is it okay to play the Black card? There are benefits to associating with Blackness, especially at a time when my Blackness can attract financing and or support. But I am a person first. I'm a creator first. I don't lead with my Blackness though. In some circles, it may precede me. And I think this could go different ways with different ethnicities, races, where do you step forward with that and feel comfortable in doing that?
I like that question. When do I play the Black card is a great question. How do I answer that? How many white people are watching? I'm kidding. When do I play the Black card? Okay, that's a really great question. I feel like I have so many answers for this. Here's the thing. I agree. I think that you are a person first. And I like that you said that. At the end of the day, you are a Black man. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with owning that. Now, this is one thing that I will say that I've noticed from all my pitching in the past few years. Using my Blackness is a superpower currently, because they being white executives simply don't know our story. So when you go in saying this is a Black character written and directed by a Black man, this is a Black story, and you explain all the reasons why that is and what that means. The reason that it's a superpower is because there is no such thing as no in that scenario, because there is no, that doesn't make any sense. You go, oh, it doesn't make any sense because it's a Black thing. And they're like, right, moving on. So it depends on how you play it. Now, the thing about using your Black card is, this, man, is such a complicated question, but I'm going to try to find a way to short way to answer this. The thing is, obviously, you don't want to make everything about being Black, because that's not what it is. Our stories are more than that. Our stories, many Black stories are stories that could be about anyone that just happened to be starring Black faces. Some of my favorite Black stories, to be honest. But in many ways, they need to feel that it's a Black story, because that makes it feel different. It makes it feel new. It makes it feel exciting. It makes it feel sellable. So what I've learned is you can use that Black card until the money comes in. And then once the money's in, you do whatever the heck you want. You know what I'm saying? Because once the money's in and everyone's on board, you know, like, use that Blackness, because, you know, our culture, and this isn't just for Black people, anyone of color, our culture is interesting. Our culture is exciting. And there's so many facets of it that have not been seen. So we should be able to use that to our benefit. And I'll give an example. There's a feature film that I start repitching again soon. In the pitch, there is a joke that I use that is a person of color thing. And you know how, like, people of color, especially people in the South, whenever you see that blue cookie can, but they're never full of cookies, they're always full of sewing pins, right? So we all get that we get that joke. In my pitch, I use that joke 3 times. It's not even in the movie. It's not a part of the movie, but it's a joke that keeps you connected to the culture of the film, because the film is about young Black kids. So this is a thing that young Black kids get. It's a joke that we get, but it's not in the script. It's just part of the vibe. So my long answer short is, someone said, hey, the cookie tin, you know what I'm saying? The long answer short is, the when to use the black card is up to you. How to use the black card is up to you. Just use it wisely and responsibly.
Thank you, Camrus. Yeah, sometimes you got to play the game, right? Along with everyone else. There is the business aspect of it. And I think that sometimes it's really hard for people of color to dive into because, I mean, let's just be honest, we've always been pushed out of it, right? So it's still like maintaining your space and saying, I deserve to be here. Another question I have is, the industry often makes it difficult to get in touch with people directly. As a podcast host who is always looking for people to share their insights with the community, I know just how hard it can be. What is the best way to reach out to folks like yourself and others in the industry who are more established? I want to direct this toward Huda because I know that Camrus, you shared kind of your experience in this, but Huda, I'd love to hear your experience or what your thoughts are.
I'm definitely not on the experienced end, but on the lesser experienced end. So I could share how I've been able to sort of reach out to people and how much of it's been so amazing actually for me to have that kind of opportunity. So in terms of like just mentorship, like just starting out from just school and professors, I would not be afraid to sort of like reach out to them and schedule office hours and talk to them. And there was, and literally just like say like, hey, I really don't know what I'm going to do after school. Can you help me, talk through and ideas and things like that. It was as simple as that. And then outside of school, I took part in organizations like Rise Up Animation and Women in Animation that I can't like highly recommend enough. Like if for anyone, especially starting out or at any point in your career, these organizations are fantastic in providing opportunities for you to get in touch with people who could possibly mentor you. Rise Up had like portfolio reviews, but that could develop into relationships that you could continue after the review. And in Women in Animation, they have these mentorship circles. And so I was able to be a part of this directing mentorship circles that was it was a filmmaking support group, and it was all female filmmakers who were all kind of at different stages making their short films. And it was led by director Mark Osborne, who's an incredible mentor and person. And he helped kind of teach us how to sort of be supportive filmmakers for each other at all these stages. And so that was, that is something that I think was really helpful for me. And then even at work right now, I'm at Netflix, and they provide mentorship programs, but also there's a really wonderful spirit of mentorship in general among just, your crew and people outside of your project. So I would have like I've had one-on-ones with directors and producers and, production managers, and everybody has been so incredibly like just generous with their time and sharing advice and what they, what their experience, and even to like, people just starting out like myself. So yeah, I just say, just don't be afraid and reach out. It's a really wonderful community. They're really nice. So yeah.
I love that answer. I know you prefaced that by saying, well, maybe I don't have the most experience, but those steps that you're talking about, first of all, they translate to anything in any kind of area, right? But that's something really attainable. And I think that's where you start, is something attainable. And then you can take that to somewhere like Netflix, where they have that mentorship program and really utilizing that. I think that's so important. And I think having those people around you not only inspire you and help you feel like I can do this, but I think we all would agree they give you a safe space, because sometimes we really need that when things are difficult and we just need to vent about it, right? I know we're about 10 minutes out, but I want to I have another question. This question is specifically for—
I actually wanted to hop on that
question
briefly. For reaching out, I feel like there's so many ways to do it depending on the field, right? I wanted to mention that my manager, who I've been with for like 5 or 6 years, he actually reached out to the head of a film festival that I was in, who reached out to me, and we've been working together for years. So I think oftentimes reaching out to someone's team is always the best way if it's for on-camera talent, but there's so many avenues when contacting someone that is trusted to us, if that makes sense. So like if it's someone that we've worked with before, if it's someone that we're always in close vicinity with, that's one way to do it. If the approach is correct, if you're coming from the correct space. And one thing I wanted to say for the young creators out there, when it comes to mentorships, as Huda brought up, one thing that I was taught, I'm going to share with all of you because it's worked like a charm, asking for advice. Now, if you're looking for a mentor and if you ask them to give you some advice, it's a very interesting way to make them your mentor. So it's actually worked on me, and I didn't even realize it was happening. An actor asked me if they could get some advice. I hopped on a call with them. I gave them a bunch of stuff. And then months later, I'm still giving them all this information. Yeah. I was like, I'm your mentor now. The same thing. Right?
I wanted to say the same thing, just as somebody kind of on the other side. I mean, I know that there's a friend of mine, Mia Olufemi, on this listening, and we have been colleagues before, and she knows that I am unafraid to go ask people to talk to me. I am unafraid, because the worst thing they're going to do is ignore you, and you're nowhere soft. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Almost everybody wants to talk to you if you present yourself well, if you give them an opportunity to talk about themselves, and if you show them that you have a genuine interest in something that they've done and relate it to something you want to do. Do a little bit of homework, but be unafraid. But also, as somebody who now, I get a fair amount of those calls. I'm happy to get the DM. I'm happy to have gotten the email because she knows a friend that I know. It happens all the time, and I'm happy to talk. I mean, that one phone call that I told you guys about earlier today, the animator that I know, she was like somebody on some massive production that I was also affiliated with for a little while. She found a guy who knew me. He said, call Priya, and we had a 45-minute talk today. And again, I'm sure what ended up happening was that I said, when you've written a treatment, send it to me and I'll read it. So I put it out there for her, but it's because we just connected. So I really encourage everybody to do the thing of getting to know somebody a little bit so that you can find a connection. Because if you find a real connection, a good human being who is worth your time will reach back out.
I love that. And I would be remiss to say, whoever wrote in that question, feel free to reach out to me. I think that, just as everyone else had said here, we get into these positions where we're grateful enough, we're blessed enough to now be that connection. And as everyone here has been saying, it's really inspiring me. That's one reason that when we started our podcast, Ratings and Reviews, I didn't want it just to be ratings and reviews. This is a new space. This is a new media space. So I started reaching out to people in the industry because it was so young. I was like, I feel like I can reach out and people will actually talk to me. And I had the name of Common Sense behind me. So it felt like really great. And everyone was really open, and that space is so open. And I feel like whoever wrote that question, I have a lot of contacts in the industry, and they want to hear from people like you. And I would love to make those introductions. And I think, as everyone on this panel has said, don't be afraid to ask, because just because someone seems to be in a position that's like higher up, they came from somewhere else where they had to ask those questions. They had to like knock on doors to get where they are now. So just as a follow-up to that, I think I have time for one more question. So Priya, Priya and all, let's do this one. Do you see the impact of the pandemic and more remote connections changing or expanding possibilities for filmmakers globally? So we'll start with you, Priya, and then we can go around.
Can you say that question one more time?
Yes, it's loaded. Yeah. Do you see the impact of the pandemic and more remote connections changing or expanding possibilities for filmmakers globally?
Yeah, I can speak to my own experience on it and say that I actually think it helped. I actually think it helped with connectivity. I think it put down a lot of barriers. I remember one of the first things I had to do when COVID hit and I had quit a job and decided to be independent was pitch a show to Netflix. And I remember, and I knew this executive. I had seen her in her fancy office in LA prior to this. And then when the Zoom came on, she was like in her bedroom in a t-shirt. And it just took all the walls between us kind of came down in what I think is actually a really productive way. I just thought, oh, I can ask her about her kids because I can see that there are toys on the bed, it created some humanity and gave us space for some humanity. So I'm all for it. I have been reaching out pretty intentionally to creators all over the world. I'm particularly interested in South Asia, so I'm looking for talent there all the time. And so, yes, I have created those connections, and I do think that it is a really viable option. I also just think in the animation space, just to be strategic for a minute, if you're thinking about something and you can think about something, like the Coco Melon model a little bit of finding something that can really travel, no dialogue, something that can really, really be relatable across borders. I'm all for it. I'm very interested in finding those pieces. And working with those kind of creators. And I think that other folks are finding the same. The humanity barriers are all coming down in a really good way, in my opinion.
Camrus or Huda?
Oh, I just completely agree with Priya. Even before COVID, for my short film, I actually worked with an art director who was from Poland, lives in Poland, and so it was a wonderful experience, and she's incredible. And I think that it was so doable, and it was even before the pandemic as well. So I could already see just how it's not that difficult to sort of adapt to that model when needed. And it's much easier, of course, in animation as well, just because of the techniques that are involved that are so easily transferable. So yeah, I'm all for it as too.
Yeah, I think for this short, no one on my team, I hadn't met anyone on my team until after we finished, because everything was on Zoom. There was during 2021 when we did it. So there was never a chance for any of us to meet ahead of time. But since the pandemic, that has become the norm, where I've been doing most of my feature film pitches on Zoom. Almost every live action audition is all self-taped now. So what's great about it is everything and everyone seems so much more accessible, where before, a couple of years ago, if you're shooting a film live action, you just want to cast in LA because you're shooting in LA and that they're living in LA. But nowadays it's like, oh, let me just look around the world, because our animators were from around the world and there's no reason not to, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, in a very beautiful way, it did open up the world to collaborating a little bit from across the seas.
That's great. Yeah, I think the pandemic definitely humbled us all. And I think it also took away from, there's so many things behind the face that you see that you're meeting, right? Some people have anxiety, some people communicate in different ways. And I think being able to communicate through something like Zoom and to people that you maybe would have never had connections with in the past, or it may have felt like that would be too difficult to get a connection because they live all the way over here, right? It just allows for things that maybe in-person connection has not always allowed for. So I appreciate you all. I know we're getting close to time, and I'm always great at going over time, but if there's any final notes, any final words of advice that anyone wanted to give, feel free.
Hey, look, for all my people of color out there, look, there's room for all of us. You know what I'm saying? There's plenty of room. If it doesn't feel like it, we're current proof that we are making room. So do not be afraid to go for it. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you're from or who your family is. If you have no friends or family in the game, it does not matter. There is space, there are opportunities, and if you don't find it, then make it yourself.
Yeah. And don't let anyone convince you that there's not space. It is not true. And don't let anyone convince you that there's not talent to do the thing that needs to be done. They're there. And if you can't figure it out, find one of us to help you figure it out, and we'll help you figure it out.
Yeah. And don't afraid to connect with people who love what you love. There's always something amazing that comes out of it. So yeah.
Thank you so much to all three of you. I could have talked to you all for hours on end, but this has been really inspiring. And I think, I hopefully speak for all the attendees where this feeling of being in the safe space and being surrounded by support, I would say, let's take this out into the world, into creating what you love, and remembering, as I think all of these panelists said so beautifully, that only you can tell your story. And that's why there's space for all of you, because everyone's story is different. So thank you so much for allowing me to moderate this panel. I'm going to send it back over to Maria Cristina. Thank you all.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Huda, Camrus, and Priya. It's just mind-blowing to me. Laura, you did a beautiful job moderating, so thank you for being with us. But Camrus, Huda, and Priya, you all are so inspired, for bringing your creative, scrappy, expansive, always making more space, soulful selves to this conversation. It really is like so meaningful to us to really think about how we're continually growing, and just like being here, and like it's happening, and it continues to happen. And your work resonates. And what's really interesting is like we're having this conversation as part of sort of the grown-up side of NYICFF, right, in the industry forum, but also thinking that your work is exponential, right, because it's also impacting our young audiences who maybe we're not going to see that sort of little seed of inspiration, or kids seeing themselves on screen, or seeing a different kind of storytelling until 20 years out. But trust me, we will see it. So thank you, everybody. Also, like, amazing comments, such generosity and such sharpness in all of our participants. Make sure you join us next week. We're going to have the last conversation, which is going to be STEM stories on screen, also very focused on representation. It originated as part of our Girls POV series, but really wonderful, culturally, racially diverse storytelling within that, and connecting the dots in terms of, as Camrus said, like really thinking about who we're casting, the kinds of stories and roles we're casting them in, and all of those great realizations that we want to happen while young folks are experiencing these beautiful films on screen. So next Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, sign up if you haven't already. Thank you all again for being here. Really appreciate it. Much love to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.